Okay, here we are. Welcome back. Good to see you all for Linguistics 406. Many of you already got email from me about your midterm exam. If you haven't gotten it yet, you will soon. I haven't finished all of them yet, so still a bunch of them to come. So in case you haven't gotten an email, they are still in process, so I'll grade them as soon as I can. We will talk about the results next week. When they're all through, so everybody has had a chance to look at how they did on the exam. Today, we're going to move on and we're going to go to a new topic. We're going to talk about words. So enough about phonetics and phonology, enough about pronunciation. We're going to look at words for the next couple of weeks or so. And let me just show you on the syllabus what this looks like. You should be able to see part of our syllabus. There it is, part of our syllabus on your screen right now. And as you can see, we're past midterm time. It's November 2nd, and we are a week behind our original schedule. So we're just starting to talk about morphology, the study of words. In linguistics, the word morphology means the study of word structure from a Greek word morph, or a Greek root called morph, which means structure. And of course, in language, the most important structures that we have are the words of language. So we're going to talk about words here for a couple of weeks. If you just scroll down a little, you can't see the screen. So let me see. Okay, let me try that again and see if it works better. And now I can't get it back. Let me see if I have a way to fix that. Doesn't want to let me minimize Zoom. Maybe I can make it slightly smaller, and then I can get to my desktop, which is where we can get this to open. Okay, so anyways, let's try this again. Where are we? That's not right. So here we are. Let me try that again to see if we could pull up the syllabus. Can you see it now? Can you see the syllabus on the screen? Yes? Okay, very, very good. So let me scroll down to the bottom of the syllabus to see where we are. As I mentioned, we are a week behind our original schedule. So we've done both of the midterms. We're in good shape for that. Don't want to give anything away, but most people did really well on that second midterm again. So that's very good, very good. So we'll start talking about morphology. Actually, we had originally scheduled that for the week before the midterm, and here we are a week later than we had originally planned. We're going to spend a couple of weeks talking about words. I have two different sets of PowerPoints for you there. One called the lexicon, and the lexicon is what linguists call the vocabulary of a language. We'll start by looking at that first, and then we're going to look at the second set of slides, which is entitled Morphology, where we look at the internal structure of words. There's also a video that I would like you to look at. It's called The Empire Strikes Back, but a different version from what you may have seen elsewhere. So here's the YouTube link as always. As we move on to the end of the course, oh my, that looks like the end of the semester is coming up pretty soon. We still have to talk about syntax. We will do so, as well as semantics, the study of meaning, and pragmatics, the study of language use in context. So we'll look at all of those. In between, we'll have Thanksgiving break, the end of the month, the 23rd. We will not have class the whole week. The university is off. And then, of course, in the middle of December, a final exam. First time we're seeing this as we're scrolling through the syllabus every week. And one thing I should point out that I will tell you many times from here on out again, the final exam will start at 5 p.m., an hour later than our usual class. So normally our class always starts at 4, but there's a university rule that says that any 4 p.m. class must start their final exam at 5. And the rationale is basically that, if we start at 5, we can just go a little bit longer than we used to. If we write from 5 until 6:50 p.m., that gives us 1 hour and 50 minutes, which is the normal time that final exams have to give, 1 hour and 50 minutes. The people who had a class at 2:30, if they also want to get their 1 hour and 50 minutes for their final exam, they would write from 2:30 straight into a 4 p.m. time slot. And so to disentangle that schedule, that's the rationale, that's the reason why all of us 4 o'clock people have to do these later finals. So anyways, that's what we are. And it'll be just with a, the email format, the same procedure like we did for the midterm. So one more go around and then we're done with all that. Anyways, here we are talking about words. Let me shut this down. Any questions, comments before we go? Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. I had a question. So will the final, I think you mentioned, but I don't remember. It's a cumulative?
Yes. So the final exam is kind of like a two-headed monster. On the one hand, it is the only exam that covers the last weeks of the course, right? So it's like a third midterm in that sense, because everything that we're going to do from here on out hasn't shown up on any other exam, right? So the final exam will have a very heavy emphasis on all of this new material, everything that we're going to do from now until the end of the course. Perhaps 65-70%, like 2/3 of it or so will be from the new materials that we're going to do from now. But final exams are also supposed to look over everything we've done in the course, and so there will be a comprehensive cumulative component in there as well, maybe 30-35% of the points that are available at that time.
Got it. And I had another question, kind of hard to articulate, but so on the midterm, the chapters were very condensed, as you know, opposed to the first exam. So the midterm, I spent a lot of time studying, and I spent a lot of time studying on the sign language and focus on things that were not actually in the test because we don't know what's on the test. So I ended up, I think it's fine, but I ended up focusing on the wrong thing. So when something is so condensed, like these chapters are going to be very condensed, what do you recommend for like a better way to study? Because if I overload myself with information, I'm gonna mess up. So what do you recommend then?
So what I always tell people is to make use of all the different materials that they have at their disposal. So as you study, you definitely want to review your notes, your class notes. You definitely want to review the PowerPoints. You definitely want to review what it says in the textbook. And it's actually a very good idea to sort of amalgamate all of that, sort of bringing all of that together, right, in one place. A very good study strategy would actually be to, create a new set of notes from all of that input. So you take your original class notes and then just synthesize, put all of that together physically and therefore also mentally. And in that way, you're bringing together and learning information from all these different sources, and you're making connections in your mind that you wouldn't have otherwise, relying on just one source or another. So that would definitely be a good strategy to go about doing that. In terms of the actual selection of material that's on the exam, look at what sorts of things that are highlighted by the different sources. So if you find something that features prominently in our class, which is also featured prominently in the book, then that would seem to indicate that both the authors of the book and your professors think that this is something really, really important. If you want to have a more concrete guide, at the end of each one of the PowerPoint sets, there's a things to know sort of slides, right? Where the main learning goals are for that particular section, and the things that are listed there, that are highlighted there on that last set of slides, those are the most essential things. Those are definitely the things that you want to be conversant with, that you want to be able to do, and you want to be able to know. And though these are essential skills and essential concepts, as I mentioned earlier on, it's those last slides that really are like a condensed study guide that point out what the most essential ideas are. That's not to say that other things are not important, but these are definitely the ones you don't want to be without, that you want to have. And therefore, those things that are there and that are highlighted by both your professor and in the book and all the different sources, all of us who are delivering this course together for you think that these are the most important things. So you definitely want to expect those on the exams. Not every one of them in the same proportion, but those are definitely going to be on the exam. On the other hand, if you find something that is perhaps highlighted or discussed in the book, but we never mentioned anything about it in class at all, then that is probably a less central concept, certainly as far as your professor is concerned, as I am concerned. If you want to be pragmatic about it, you can ask yourself, well, who makes the test? The authors of the text or the guy who's conducting these Zoom sessions for you. So that would be a pragmatic way to think about it. But definitely things that are highlighted in class and in the book, those you definitely want to know. Those will definitely show up on the exams. Those things that are in the final slides, in each one of the PowerPoint sets, those are the essential things to know. You definitely want to know those.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Other questions, comments before we get going? All right, so let's pull up a new slide. And so, as they say, now for something completely different, because it is a total shift from what we've been doing. So here's our new show. This is, there we are. Can you see this one called the Lexicon? Can you see that on your screen over here in green? Yeah, okay, very, very good. So we're going to talk about the vocabulary here. And just like all the material on phonetics and phonology was, as people have pointed out, very technical and condensed, the study of the lexicon, of the vocabulary, is probably at the opposite end, very non-technical, very much not as formal as as what we're used to now. So in this slide, we're going to talk a little bit about what the vocabulary of languages is like, and also where we get new words to add to our vocabulary. And as we'll see, languages offer a whole range of different processes that speakers of the language can use to come up with new words as we have a need for new words. They're all the time. There are new things being invented. There are new ideas that come up. There are new fads, and all these things come with words. And so all of us as speakers of a language have the ability to come up with new words. In fact, we have many different ways of making new words. Whether your word actually catches on then in a wider society, that is a different question, of course. So we'll explore these issues related to the lexicon, which is the vocabulary. Basic idea is we all, as speakers of a language, have a lexicon in our head. Like we swallowed a dictionary. In order to know a language, you have to know many different words in that language. You have to know how the word sounds. You have to know what the word means. You have to know various aspects of how to use the word. For example, whether it's a technical word, whether it's an offensive word, whether it's a baby talk word, or whatever kind of word it is, and all sorts of other information that we have in our heads about each and every word that we know. By the way, talking about words in your mind, if you had to guess how many words you know in your first language, what would you guess? I don't know if you've ever read anything about that, but all of us here in this class, we're all adults. We've been speaking our first language for a couple decades or more now. So we've encountered many words along the way, obviously. If you know more than one language, then of course you will have not just one lexicon in your head, but two, or perhaps even three, right? Because you need the words for each one of those languages. What would your guess be? Maybe write down a number. You can write it in front of you, or you can put it on the chat or say it out, whichever you like. Nobody's going to grade this. This is just a guess. So what the idea would be. So Eric is saying maybe 7,000 to 10,000, and so that's certainly in the many thousands. In the many thousands. It's not like remember way back when we talked about animal communications early on in the course, we saw how typically one species may have something in the range of a dozen or 2 dozen or maybe 3 dozen calls, not 2 or 3 thousand, but 2 or 3 dozen. So in animals, something on the range of 10 or 20 or 30 different things that they can tell each other. And everybody who's suggesting things in the chat is going thousands or tens of thousands, right? And so we know very large number of words. The precise number will obviously differ from one person to another, right? Depending on what all you've experienced in your life, right? Lots of activities come with words, including activities like taking a linguistics class. That comes with a lot of words, right? And so we probably know different numbers of words, but many, many thousands for sure. So let's explore that a little bit more over here. So we'll talk about the vocabulary of languages and where languages get new words from. And again, the basic thing to remind ourselves of is that the vocabulary of a language does not reside somewhere in a library, in a printed dictionary or something like that. Instead, the vocabulary of a language exists in the minds of every person who speaks the language. We all have a mental dictionary in our head. And one of the things that you learn as you grow up speaking a language, whether as a first language or as a second language, one of the things you need to do is learn a large number of words. Every speaker has such a mental dictionary in their head, a lexicon in their head, with thousands of words. And mark a little asterisk over there. After all, we have a lot of things to talk about, and we definitely want a language that allows us to communicate about anything and everything that could possibly enter our mind, right? We wouldn't want a language that doesn't make it possible for us to talk about anything particular. We want to talk about whatever, even things that nobody has ever thought of before, things that haven't even been invented yet, things that haven't happened yet. We want to be able to talk about all these things. So not only do we need a dictionary in our heads with many words, but it's got to be an open-ended dictionary where we can feed more words and add more words to it all the time. And this is something that speakers do all the time, automatically, and for the most part, completely without any effort or without even being aware of what it is that we're doing there. In fact, when you look across languages, the vocabularies of languages are quite distinct, are quite different. In pretty much every language, you'll find words that are not easily translatable into other languages. I show you a picture over here on the slide, which I pulled up when I Googled a Brazilian Portuguese word, cafuné, very common word in Portuguese, in Brazilian Portuguese. Cafuné means sort of like soothingly running your fingers through a person's hair to comfort them, right? And so here you can see in the picture, so there's grandma comforting the child, right? Making them feel better. What a wonderful concept that is. I mean, we should have that, but we don't. We don't, right? If we all agreed, if we wanted to, we could start using that word today, but so far it hasn't caught on yet. And in fact, there is no equivalent word to that in English, nor in any other language that I'm aware of. But here it is. Brazilian Portuguese has that. There are a lot of words that are unique about, that are really limited to any one particular language. This probably happens more often than we would imagine. When something new gets invented, obviously the words that are associated with that new invention initially will only exist in that language where the thing has been invented. So as an example, the game of basketball is an American game. It was invented in the United States. And so it's therefore not a surprise that, when the game was first invented and only played in America, that the only language that had basketball words would have been English, or more precisely, American English. Then, as the word got out and as the game spread to other parts of the world, of course, they created their own basketball words. But I would imagine there probably are parts of the world where people have, no knowledge of basketball even now, and therefore their languages wouldn't have any basketball words at all. And so languages naturally have a set of words that doesn't necessarily have an equivalent in every other language. How many words is actually rather controversial. You read different numbers. Tens of thousands is definitely a good range. Estimates, credible estimates that I've read, range anywhere from, say, like 15,000 to about 60,000 for an average American high school graduate. So imagine a young person, perhaps 18 years old or something, that just graduated high school. If they're 18 years old, that means they've been speaking the language for 17 years, because normally you learn your first word when you're about a year old, about your first birthday, give or take a few months, right? And so for 17 years, that person has been learning the language and has ended up knowing tens of thousands of words. These are, by the way, very conservative estimates. Conservative in the way that, in the sense that, related words are counted as one. So if you think about, words like go and goes and going and gone, that doesn't count as 4 words, that counts as 1, right? And these are just different forms of the same word. Even went, which is the past tense of go and doesn't sound anything like the word go at all. It sounds like looks like a completely different word, right? Go and went, they share nothing in common, but that's just a past tense form of go. And people learn all of these as one package, right? There is no English speaker who knows going without knowing go and without knowing goes and so on. They come together, and so they're counted as one, not as 4 or 5 different words. So our vocabulary is truly very, very large, and for the most part, we just pick up new words as we go through life, oftentimes not noticing what we're doing, that we've done it. Certainly in our native language, we don't have to do what you have to do in a classroom when you take a another language class like French 101 or Korean 101, you have to sit down and memorize lists of words and their meanings. And in your native language, you never do that. You just pick words up as you hear them and as people use them with you. And it's automatic, effortless, really. And everybody ultimately does that. Vocabulary of a language is closely associated with the culture that the language is used in. I already gave you an example of that. Basketball is very much part of American culture, right? It's a popular sport in the United States. Many people play it for fun. There's professionals who play it for money, and lots of fans who watch it, who follow the league, who follow their favorite teams. Big part of our culture, right? And so, another culture where basketball plays no role, where people don't know about it, wouldn't have any of these words. So words and culture are clearly closely related with one another. And so the vocabulary that you have reflects the culture of the language of speakers. Basketball words exist only in societies, in cultures that know about the game of basketball. Similarly, words that have to do with philosophy, philosophical terminology only exists in societies that do philosophy, that are interested in philosophy. And to our knowledge, the first society in world history that was interested in philosophy was ancient Greece, about 2,500 years before our time. That's when ancient Greek philosophers such as Socrates and his student Plato, and Plato's student Aristotle, and you know those guys' names, right? Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Those are the kinds of folks who put philosophy on the map, right? They didn't just go through life and accept things as they are. They wondered about why the world is the way it is, why people act the way they do, right? Why things can't be different. And perhaps other people elsewhere had also thought about these same things, but these guys were the first ones to write it down. And so we know about their thoughts and, what they had to say about all these things. And if you study philosophy to this day, people examine their thoughts. But, that may be all very interesting and very profound. And yet other societies may just have never gotten around to it. That doesn't make them worse societies or worse people. It's just that they didn't get interested in basketball or in philosophy, right? People have different interests, and groups of people have different interests. Whatever your interests are or your culture's interests are, the language will develop the requisite vocabulary for that. So vocabulary that you have personally reflects very much your own life experience, whatever you have encountered and gotten involved in your life. So for example, the kind of classes that you've been taking at college, or in high school or elsewhere, they all come with words. For example, the word lexicon that we learned today, or words like alveolar ridge and things that we had in the last chapter. Those are all linguistic terms that you have learned here, being part of this course. And your friend who may have never taken a linguistics course wouldn't know those words, right? Unless you talk to them about it. Whenever you pick up a hobby, some sort of interest, usually there are words that go along with it. If you want to play a game online or in reality, there are words that go along with that. When you take a job somewhere or volunteer somewhere, become part of an organization or a club, there are words that those folks all have. And somebody else who didn't have all of those experiences would end up with a rather different vocabulary. So you can quite confidently bet that pretty much every one of us who's here in this class today probably knows a few words that nobody else here knows, even though we do speak the same language. It's the same language in the sense that we share all the core vocabulary, the everyday words. But when it comes to like specialized experiences and that we've had individually, that's where our knowledge of language and our knowledge of words can be rather different from everybody else's. So let's check some words from a particular area of life, and you can check yourself whether you know those words and whether you know what area of life these words come from. So here's a bunch of words, all of them English words, American English words, I promise. Do you know these words? So here goes. Have you heard words like asana, guru, or mantra, or namaste? Anybody know those words? Anybody ever use those words? Do you know what those words, what sort of activities or area of life that they come from? What kind of words are those? These are all words that have to do with, they all have to do words that have to do with yoga. Absolutely. They're all yoga words, right? And then sometimes people say they're all words that come from India, which is true, right? Yoga comes from India after all, right? And so a lot of these words are actually borrowed from Hindi or perhaps other Indian languages. So if you do yoga or you know a little bit about yoga, you probably know some of these words, perhaps all of these words. Somebody else who's never gotten any interest in yoga may not know these words, right? And there you see, we already have some differences. Let me give you another set of words, and you see whether you know these words and whether you know what sort of area of life those other words have to do with. So here's some words. See if you know these words. Do you know what a creeper is? What an enderman is? What the nether is? Do you know what an iron golem is or a snow golem? Do you know what redstone is? Do you know who Steve is? If you know all these words, then you know something about, absolutely, you know about Minecraft. That's what it is, right? Any activity, any hobby, any game, any sort of thing you learn, all of these things come with words. And these are Minecraft words for you. And there you see. Seen here from Minecraft. And you can see other, some people in on the chat are going, these are Minecraft words. Sure, I know those. And I'm sure there's some people in class who are saying, well, I don't know, I never seen those, right? Because maybe you've never gotten into this particular game, which is only the most popular game of them all ever, but anyways. So talking about the size of the vocabulary, there's actually remarkable differences between languages there. Some languages are spoken in small societies, perhaps a few thousand or only a few hundred members of that society, only a few hundred or a few thousand speakers. In fact, there's languages that are spoken only by a few dozen families. And ultimately, if a language becomes endangered, it can disappear to where there may be only a handful of speakers. I know a language spoken in Arizona called Chemehuevi, which has one speaker. One. In fact, he features in one of the videos that we watch in this class, so you'll learn about him pretty soon. He is Native American. He was raised by his grandma at a time when most members of his tribe no longer spoke the language, but grandma did talk to him in Chemehuevi, and so he was the last person to learn the language. Today, he's the last fluent speaker of his language. Small societies are not just small, but their languages are often unwritten languages, and perhaps the whole society is really illiterate. That happens in a lot of places, especially in so-called third world countries. Think about a small society, perhaps in the Amazon, and a society like that would have a vocabulary that's comparatively small, perhaps a few thousand words only. Now, a few thousand words, that's a remarkable number of words. That certainly is all the words you need to survive in that society. That number of words is certainly open-ended in the sense that you can always add more words to it, like some Brazilians come around the river bend and tell you about guns and stuff, so you then know a word for gun, which you hadn't had before, right? That certainly happens in every language, right? But one of the things that small illiterate societies do not have is thousands of words for different chemical compounds and abstract mathematical terminology, and frankly, linguistic terminology like we're learning in this class. So if you strip all of that away, which is thousands and thousands and thousands of specialized words that we would have, say, in English, you end up with a vocabulary that's rather smaller than, say, that of a large language like English. Still, 3,000 to 5,000 words, that is a very large vocabulary. And in a society like an Amazonian Indian society, you would probably have a very large number of words that describe the local environment, that describe, that give the names of local plants and local animals, and in fact parts of plants and animals and what you can do with them. Societies like that would normally have a really intimate knowledge of their specific environment and what kinds of plants and animals you can eat or use for medicinal purposes and so on. A very rich knowledge base over there that outsiders like us would not have. So it's not like we're the people with knowledge and they're not. It's like we all have our distinct types of knowledge, knowledge that we need to survive in our particular environment, right? And we have that, and they have that as well. There again, there's unique words in every language that are not easily translatable into other language. For example, among Yanomamo people, and these are some Yanomamo there on the picture over there, there's a word called amiwa, which is a family relation word, a kinship term. Like in English, uncle and, grandpa are kinship terms. Amiwa, though, has a very interesting meaning. Amiwa could mean either a sister of yours or a female cousin of yours. And they both considered the same relationship in Yanomamo culture. Those are the kinds of things that people investigate in a subfield called anthropological linguistics. And it looks like this fall, fall 2022, we will again have the Ling/Anth 416 course in the schedule, Anthropology and Linguistics 416, called Anthropological Linguistics. Really fascinating course, whether you're a linguist or an anthropologist. Highly recommend that course. And they look really at language and culture and the interplay between those things. And that's going to be a fun course. So do look out for that next fall. Another thing you find that is often surprising to outsiders is a very unique vocabulary for orienting yourself in where you are relative to other people or other things. So if you look around your house where you are right now, you're probably sitting in front of a screen there on a chair, right? You see the screen in front of you. You have other things that you have behind you. As I sit over here, I have things to my left and other things to my right. And that's how we talk. And if I was going to turn, then something that was in front of me before now is to my right, and something that was behind me is now on my left. In some languages, they don't do it that way. Instead of having relative spatial terms like this, they use absolute terms. They'll say things like, the screen is to the east of me. And by the way, the door behind me, not behind me, the door is to the west of me. That is, you always orient yourself with regard to cardinal directions. In order to be able to do that, you have to constantly be aware of where is north, where is south, where is west, where is east. Not something that we are used to as Westerners, not something that we're used to. But if you were say, a speaker of an Australian Aboriginal language, then that is the way you do it. That is the way you find your way around, and that's how you orient yourself. Something. So the vocabularies of languages are very much unique, cultural bounds, not easy to translate, and of rather different sizes. In a large technological society, such as around here in the United States, in California, you have languages with 100,000 plus words. Nobody knows all of these words. Nobody knows all of these words, right? A lot of them are very highly technical words. For example, if you go to medical school, big part of what you have to learn is all the medical terminology, the names of different conditions, different parts of the body, and names of different procedures and medicines and whatever, right? That's a big part of what you'll have to learn. And somebody who isn't in the medical field wouldn't know most of these words. It's been said that an average American college student recognizes passively about 40,000 or so words. On top of that, maybe the same number of unique proper names. That is the names of people like my friend Bob, or Grandpa, or Britney Spears, President Biden, Donald Trump, Cal State Fullerton, California, Pacific Ocean, United States. There's so many names that we know, probably as many unique proper names as all the other words taken together, and all of that makes up your mental dictionary, your lexicon in your mind. So the reason why we have this discrepancy, where a small illiterate society may have only a few thousand words, whereas a language like English has 100,000 plus words, in fact, way more than 100,000 words, is that in the small illiterate society, if for some reason the children who are growing up at any one particular time, if they do not get to hear a particular word, they will not learn it. And since it's not a written language, that word will then automatically fall out of the language. And if for some reason that particular meaning needed a word in a subsequent generation, they would have to create a new word, having no memory of the old word. One generation is all that it takes for a word to completely fall out of use. Passive vocabulary, words that you don't actually use, do not get passed on to the next generation, right? You may be a parent, you may know the word, but if none of the parents use that word with their children, then the children will not know that word. The word will no longer be part of the language. So there's a high high turnover rate of words in small illiterate societies. On top of that, of course, all this technical scientific vocabulary that we've accumulated for the last few hundred years in Western society, especially, a non-technological society would have no words for that. I read once about an African language that had one word for anything made of metal. Now imagine that could be a little nail, or that could be a whole airplane. If they're both made of metal, you would call it by the same name. In a non-technological society, there aren't very many things that are made of metal. So that's very easy to live with, and you don't need a lot of words for things made of metal. When you become accustomed to seeing lots of things made of metal, then of course you will need to create the words for talking about that. The largest repository of English words is there on the lower right-hand side in your picture. The Oxford English Dictionary is the largest dictionary of the English language, probably the largest dictionary of any language in the world. 250,000 entries in the Oxford English Dictionary. It's all online nowadays. People call it the OED. So if you Google that, you can get it all online for free, and it's an ongoing effort for over 100 years now, putting all of that together. Way back when people still relied on the printed edition, they would, go through the letters. So the first volume, maybe the letter A through AR or something like that. And then the next one would be AP to C, whatever. And once they make it through the whole dictionary and they arrive at the letter Z, they have to come out with an additional volume containing all the new words that have been added to the language since they started off in the first place. Just showing you how many new words that we get all the time. New words are being created all the time. If you're interested in learning more about that, there's a source here on the bottom of the page, an article entitled "How Large Can Receptive Vocabulary Be?" That is, how many words could an individual person possibly know, understand passively without necessarily speaking them. Your active vocabulary is always smaller than the words that you recognize passively, both in your first language and in your second language. By the way, what I just said, all of what I just said about your lexicon, your mental dictionary, is twice as true for all those of you who are bilingual, because you don't just have one such lexicon in your mind, but two, or maybe even three, if you speak three different languages, right? And every one of them with thousands of words. And new words coming up all the time. A word that I just encountered a few years ago is the word fleek. That was a slang term. I understand it's already getting old. Anybody still recognize that? Anybody still use that? F-L-E-E-K. That was like all over the social media there for a little while. Anybody remember that? Anybody would know what it means if somebody used it? You remember that? There you go. You remember what it means? How would you characterize the meaning of that thing if you have any idea at all? I've seen it around. I remember when it was new, people actually wondering, what does that mean, right? So here's this is a screenshot where somebody just heard it for the first time. All names have been removed so that nobody gets embarrassed right over here. So somebody's posting, what's a fleek? And then somebody answers, well, not really used that much. Hipsters and kids use it, meaning spot on or very attractive. That's what that person means. Other people are saying used a lot in Snapchat and Instagram, meaning good or attractive, right? And there they go. Oh, Akira saying it came from a Vine video. Wow, you even know the origin of a word. I had no idea. So anyway, somebody made that up, right? And by the way, that's very typical of slang terms. Slang terms are transitory. They pop up somewhere, and oftentimes we don't know exactly who or where they got started, and then they catch on, and like they poof, it's like a flash fire, it become very popular, and then they fade just as quickly as they came about, as they start, and they go away forever. And if you're still using it 5 years later or whatever, people look at you like you're totally not cool, and what's wrong with you? Nobody says that anymore, right? So anyways, so here's some words, all of them English words. You can check if you know these words and how many of them you know. Maybe you can keep track for yourself. Think about whether you've heard a particular word, whether you think you sort of generally know what it means. With a lot of words, our sort of like understanding is very vague, right? So you say a word like carp, C-A-R-P. I know that's a kind of fish, but beyond that, I really don't know anything about it. Kind of fish, that's my sense of what that word means. And somebody who is a fisherman probably knows a lot more about it. Somebody who's a biologist probably knows a lot more about it. But for me, kind of fish is good enough, right? Same thing if I use a word like oak. I know that's a kind of tree. I kind of know they're big trees and common in California, but beyond that, if you showed me like 50 pictures of trees, would you be able to confidently identify the oak or whatever other species of of tree there might be? Not sure we can do that. It means a kind of tree. So anyway, which of these words do you know? So do you know the word blick? Have you ever seen or heard the word blick? B-L-I-C-K certainly sounds like a fine English word. I mean, brick is a really fine common word, but turns out blick really isn't. It looks like it should be a word, but it really isn't. It wasn't a word ever. You might use it as a nonsense word, or if you invent something new, maybe you want to call it blick, you know, so it's not taken yet. The only place I've seen it is as a name, as a proper name. There's a place across the freeway from Cal State Fullerton called Blick Art Supply, and that's the only time I see. So that's just the proper name. It doesn't really exist as a regular word, but it could, right? It could become a regular name if you wanted to. Like fleek became a regular word there for a while, right? How about this one? Blick. Oh, that's the store, right? Have you heard the word loam? Would you know what loam is? L-O-A-M. Have you ever heard that? And would you know what area of life it actually comes from? Loam. For some of us English speakers, this is actually quite a common word. It's a common word for those of us who know a little bit about gardening. That's a gardening term. It's a kind of soil, sort of like a clayish type of soil. A lot of the front yards that we have around Orange County here have loam, sort of like a clay-like dirt. And there's a person over there in the yard. And if you don't work at the Home Depot or you're not into gardening, you may have never seen this word before. But if you did belong to those groups, you certainly would know what loam is. Bilge, have you heard the word bilge? You know what that is? Bilge is a boating term. So if you know about boats, if you're a sailor, you know, if you have a boat, you would know what the word bilge means. Slithy, have you ever heard that? If you have heard it, there's one unique place where you would have heard it. Ever heard it? Slithy. How about you English majors? Do we have any English majors in this class? If you're an English major, think about Lewis Carroll, who is a writer from England, 18th century writer. Lewis Carroll is the guy who wrote Alice in Wonderland. And in another book he wrote called Through the Looking Glass, there's a little poem, one of my favorite English poems, called The Jabberwocky. And in it, he used a lot of words that nobody had ever used before because he made them up. One of those words is slithy. Later on, we'll learn more about this particular poem. The slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wave. All mimsy were the borogroves, and the bromrath oused grabe. Remember that? That's the Jabberwocky, anyways. Slithy. Here you go. All mimsy were the borogroves. That's from the Jabberwocky there. You see. Do you know what a blog is? Yes, of course you know, but that's actually a pretty new word. About 20 years old, max. I don't think people were blogging before that. You know the original longer version of this word? Because this is actually what we call a clipping. This is a shortened version of what used to be a longer word when people were first writing blogs. The original word was weblog, and weblog got shortened to blog, just using the last four letters over there. It's kind of like an internet diary where you write up your thoughts and whatever it is, right? There's a person there using the word blog over there, right? You know what the word scud means? Depending on where you're from, you may know that scud is a gust of wind, depending on what part of the United States that you grew up in. So here's what they call a scud cloud in meteorology over there. Have you heard the word beck? B-E-C-K, not as a person's name. I mean, it's a family name that people may have. A beck is another word for a mountain stream, like this one over here. Tine is a word for a part of a deer's antler. The smaller. So here's different parts of the antler. This is the bone that's called a tine. Again, people who are into this particular area of knowledge, interest, they would know these words. Do you know what a sigillard is? Yes, you do know that because you belong to the right group. That is, you live in Southern California And sig alert is a Southern California word, was created right here in Southern California in the 1950s, where they got this idea, hey, let's put a traffic report on the radio where we tell people when there's a bad traffic tie-up. And they named it after the person who came up with the idea, a radio guy named Lloyd Sigmund. And from Sigmund, you get sig alert right over there. And if you're in Southern California, you're hearing sig alerts all the time. You're listening to the radio as you're driving to school, right? And then there's a sig alert that comes on, there's an accident on the 57 northbound close to Cal State Fullerton. And don't go that way because you're going to be late for class. And people from other parts of the United States, even people from like Northern California, they wouldn't know this word. This is a Southern California word. There's a picture of Lloyd Sigmund there, right? I came up with that. Do you know what the word crone means? Here's a picture of one. The crone is like an old woman, right? Have you heard the word dun? That's a color, like the color of that horse over there, brownish gray color. Which ones did you know? How many of them did you know? And I would imagine for some people, the answer may be close to 0, because these are all quite specialist words. You can see what sorts of things populate these large dictionaries, like the Oxford English Dictionary, right? And so people who have a certain interest, who need a certain knowledge, they will know these words, and other people may not. On occasion, we know where a word came from. Sometimes we don't. Somebody was suggesting on the blog here, on the chat earlier on, that the word fleek came from a Vine video, which may very well be the case. Sometimes we know where words come from, other times we don't. One word where we definitely know is the word Hispanic, which we see a lot, right, on like forms that you need to fill out for whatever. Oftentimes you have to mark whether you're Hispanic or not. And that's a surprisingly new term, and it's invented by this woman in the picture over there. Her name is Grace Flores Hughes. She worked for the government back in the 1970s, not all that long ago, right? That's like 40 plus years ago, not all that long ago. And in her office, working for the Department of Education there, they had to describe a group of students who were dropping out of school at an unusually high rate. Some of these students were of Mexican American background, others were Puerto Rican, and so they were wondering what word to use to describe these students. And any sort of existing word didn't quite seem right. Like you couldn't call them Spanish, because Spanish would imply people from Spain, which these folks definitely were not, right? Latino or Latina didn't seem right either, because, that could include Brazilians and, anyone from Latin America, perhaps even Italian. So that didn't seem right. And so she suggested the word Hispanic. She came up with that. So we don't very often know the precise occasion and the precise person who actually created a word, but here it is. Here's how we know. If you want to read the story, there's a link in the bottom there where you can read about this particular word. More commonly, we know generally the background of what sorts of people came up with a word, where it was first used. And actually, if you recall the Do You Speak American videos in the first episode, there's this guy who works for the Oxford English Dictionary, and he's their American editor, and he's going to the New York Library, if you remember that video over there. And in the New York Public Library, he reads all sorts of like unusual magazines, these tattooing magazines and skateboarding magazines, and wide range of interests, oftentimes subcultural magazines. The reason that this guy does that is because he's in search of new words, of new usages for the dictionary. Because it's in those venues where a word oftentimes pops up first. And unless they actually were looking at all of these different areas of life and monitoring them, we would never know where or how a word was first created. So new words, is that a word? Have you heard that? Glamping, that's a new word for me. Do you know what glamping is? Glamping. Glamping is actually two other words, sort of like smashed together, and we got pieces of it left. What we call a portmanteau word. Glamping means glamorous camping. It's like you're not really camping, right? Camping means toughing it out in a tent somewhere, right? People made that into a word, and you can actually go and book a glamping vacation over here. Look at that. That looks like a hotel. That doesn't look like any kind of camping for me. The Boy Scouts would frown upon this. Anyways, language provides many different ways of making new words. Each one of them is a particular recipe, a particular way of making new words. And for the rest of this set of slides, we're going to go through some of the most important ones, beginning with compounding. Compounding means taking two words we already have, sticking them together and to make a new word. This probably is one of the most common ways of making new words. You're relying on words that you already have and simply putting them together. You take the word book and the word store, you put them together and you make the word bookstore, which is a store that sells book. Transparent in the way that it's made and transparent in terms of the meaning as well. At least in the typical case, that is what happens. Compounding, again, very widespread across languages and certainly very, very popular in English for making new words. You just take two words, stick them together to make a new word. Here are some examples of compounds. The word greenhouse is created from the words green and house. This one's actually interesting because the meaning is not as straightforward as bookstore is, right? A greenhouse, if you know that word, a greenhouse is a place where they grow like tomatoes and stuff under a structure so that the elements don't get to them, so that they can ripen better and faster. Greenhouses actually are not green, if you've ever seen any. So as you're driving away from the city, in some of the neighboring areas, you may see some greenhouses where farmers grow different types of vegetables or fruits and stuff like that. And they're never green. Why are they called greenhouses? Well, there's greenery inside, right? The plants are inside. The greenhouse itself is usually made of glass or plastic, right? And notice that greenhouse doesn't mean a house painted green. So you may paint your house in a green color, that would not make it a greenhouse. The word greenhouse, the compound word greenhouse, specifically means the kind of structure that farmers use for growing tomatoes and other types of crops under a cover, under a shelter. So the meanings of compounds are not always straightforward. They're usually more than the sum of the parts that went into creating the words. And sometimes they're quite different from the parts that went into creating the words. So when you look at the word bookworm, the word bookworm, of course, describes a kind of animal that may eat its way through your books and, make the book unusable. If it's, libraries that have been in existence for several hundred years often have trouble with bookworms, were eating their way through their collections. But the word bookworm also has a metaphorical meaning when you apply it to a person. So when you call a person a bookworm, that means they're like that animal in that they're always winding their way through books. They're always reading, right? And, so if you say, oh, my friend is a bookworm, that means your friend reads all the time. And again, that's a metaphor. That's an image, right? That's an image based on what the actual animal is doing. You read a lot, so you wind your way through the books in the same way that the animal, the literal bookworm, is doing. In the same way, a pinhead may just be the head of a little pin, right? So you have a little pin and the top part of it is what we call a pinhead. But, we also metaphorically use the word pinhead to describe a person who is not very smart. So when you say, oh, Bob's a real pinhead, that's a way of saying that Bob is not very smart. Well, why? Because, well, pins are small things. So the head of the pin is tiny. And therefore, you're kind of implying he doesn't have a lot of knowledge in his head. His brain is like as small as the head of a pin, right? So there you go. That's how you get that meaning over there. Not all compounds have to be names. They could be any kind of word, like homemade is an adjective, right? Like homemade pie, homemade cookies, right? That's an adjective, a describing word. But home and made, two other words being stuck together. As long as you do that, that's what compounding is. Easygoing, stick them together. He's an easygoing person. That's a compound word, right? Restroom, rest and room, stick them together, and that's a compound word. And by the way, the meaning of that one doesn't mean what you think it means, right? If you take it literally, it would seem to be that a restroom is a place where you go when you're really tired and you need a rest. Oh, I feel so tired. I need to rest for a couple of hours. Let me go to the restroom. People don't do that. That's terribly weird, right? People don't do that. We say we're going to the restroom because we don't actually say what we're going for, right? Things like the activities we conduct in restrooms are not things we want to talk about in polite society. So we use a euphemism, right? A nice way to not say what we're really going for. So we pretend we're going to go to take a rest when in reality, well, you do other things over there. Liar, liar, you have to know that. Imagine if you were a second language learner, you had learned English in a classroom back home in your home country, and you arrive here on vacation in the United States, and your friend comes to greet you in the airport and says, you know what, I got to run to the restroom first. Your friend is just coming to pick you up. Why does he need to go take a rest here in the airport? Yeah, that doesn't make any sense at all. You really have to know that, otherwise it's completely baffling. The meanings of compounds need to be learned as individual words, just like any other word. Something else that's interesting about compounding is that when you put two words together, the second one is always the one that gives me the basic category, and the first one gives me the specifics. So if you look at what a bookstore is a kind of store which sells books. So book is the specific thing and store is the general category. So in other words, the basic category is always the second part, the last part. A bookstore is a kind of store. A bookworm is a kind of worm and not a kind of book, right? A restroom is a kind of room. And similarly, a windmill is a kind of mill, one that runs by wind power and creates electricity or something like that. If you have a location next to a river that runs pretty fast, you can build what we call a water mill. Water mills are just like windmills, just using a different power source, but the same technology. Notice the spelling though. We write windmill together without any space to separate the original two words. Windmill, we spell it as one word, but watermill, in our spelling, we like to keep that separately. And that's sort of surprising. Basically, coming from German here, which is my native language, I'd say that's positively weird, because in German, compound words are always spelled together, no matter how long they get. This is why German has some awfully long words, by the way. But anyways, in English, we like to keep the words that go into making a compound, we like to keep a space between them, especially when they get a little longer. Like, look at the difference between windmill and watermill. Water has two syllables, water, whereas wind has only one syllable. So you go windmill, and each one of the parts is only one syllable. We always spell those together, no doubt about it. But watermill, That's already 3 syllables. Let's keep those separate. And sometimes people will put a hyphen in between. Those folks who don't like to commit use hyphens. They want to commit, don't want to commit. Is that 1 word or 2? Let's put a hyphen in between just to make sure, right? But usually that's sort of like the guiding principle, that if one of the pieces or both of them are several syllables long, then we like to keep them spelled separately. It's a compound word nonetheless. And you can tell by the pronunciation, every compound word is stressed as 1 word. So we say bookstore with 1 stress on the first element, bookstore. We say greenhouse with 1 stress. Notice the difference in the following sentence. A greenhouse is not just a green house. In fact, a greenhouse is not any kind of greenhouse. Did you understand that sentence? Yes, you did. You understand the difference between the compound word greenhouse, 1 stress, as opposed to greenhouse, which is just a house that's green. That's a phrase. That's not a single word. A greenhouse is any house that's painted green, like a red house and a white house and whatever color house, right? But greenhouse as a compound has just 1 stress. So in the same way, windmill has 1 stress and watermill has 1 stress. In the spoken version of the language, it's very clear that watermill is a compound word in the same sense that windmill is also a compound word. It's the spelling that is odd, that is off, that is unpredictable. Look at the word aircraft. Of course, a kind of craft that flies through the air, as opposed to, say, watercraft or whatever other kind of craft they are, right? And so craft is the basic unit over here. And aircraft is actually an interesting example to show that we can do compounding several times over, not just once. So you make the word aircraft by compounding the words air and craft, making the word aircraft, and then you can take the word aircraft and put that together with another word to make the word aircraft carrier, which is the name of a kind of ship, right? The Navy has different kinds of ships. They have destroyers and frigates and the various kinds. And one kind of ship they have is a kind of ship called an aircraft carrier. And that is the name of the ship that, despite the spelling, is 1 single compound word, compounded in a second layer here, right? Air and craft make aircraft, and then aircraft goes into making aircraft carrier, second step over there. Here's a nice picture of a bookstore. I've read that Amazon is actually building real life bookstores nowadays. that's a nice turnaround. I love bookstores. That's a beautiful place over there. I could hang out there forever. Anyway, something else about compounds. You could do compounds several times over, productively, over and over again, in principle, without limit. That's how we got to aircraft carrier, after all. Here's how we can do that. Start with a word like air and the word craft, and then create the compound aircraft. Take that word aircraft and compound it together to make with carrier to make the word aircraft carrier. Take the word aircraft carrier and make aircraft carrier crew from that. Where do they keep the aircraft carrier crew on the aircraft carrier? Well, of course, in the, the capacity of the ship is a certain number of people in that crew. So that would be the aircraft carrier crew capacity. And there's a picture of the aircraft carrier itself, right? With lots of planes on board. Again, in English, in any compound, it's always the last element that gives you the basic meaning. A bookstore is a kind of store, and not a kind of book. A windmill is a kind of mill, not a kind of wind. An aircraft is a kind of craft, not a kind of air. So we could represent that with numbers like this. So when you have the word aircraft, there are 2 words that go in there. Here's the boundary between those words, and craft gives you the basic meaning. So I write number 1 under there. And then number 2, air modifies or changes that meaning to a more specific thing, an aircraft rather than a watercraft. Similarly, a windmill is a kind of mill. So I'll write number 1 under the basic unit, the basic category, and then wind is one way to drive a mill and water is another way to drive a mill. So we've got windmill and watermill made according to the same recipe. So we represent the formation of these words using numbers like that. And that's actually something we will practice later on when we talk about morphology, the structure of words. So there's a picture of a very traditional windmill over here. Beautiful. As I said, compounding is actually very common in languages. Chinese is famous for having a huge number of compounds. Anybody speak Chinese? If you speak Chinese, you probably know the Chinese word for this beautiful traditional Chinese bicycle over here. In Chinese, the word for bicycle is written like this. If you recall back when we were talking about writing, what we said at the time is that Chinese uses logographic writing, meaning one letter for one whole word. Well, here's the word for bicycle, and it isn't one letter, but 1, 2, 3 letters. What is going on? Did I lie to you? No, I didn't lie to you, because in fact, the word bicycle in Chinese is a compound word. It's got 3 smaller words that go into the word bicycle. And so, of course, there's one character for each individual word that goes into this compound word. So the first word in bicycle is this one over here, and it means self, something you do yourself, right? The second word in the word bicycle means to propel yourself forward or to row or to pedal. And the third one means a vehicle. So literally, the Chinese word for bicycle means self-propelled vehicle, which is what you do, right? You are the engine of this thing because you need to pedal, right? And that's a nice compound word. There are actually 3 words going into this one compound word here in Chinese. By the way, I wrote this in traditional Chinese writing, the kind of writing that people still use in places like Taiwan. But if you were like in mainland China or in Singapore or elsewhere where they use Chinese, they use simplified writing, which looks like same word, which looks like on the bottom left over there. Many languages use compounding. Here's some compounding in German. Like I said, German likes to compound words together, but when we do, they always spelled without spaces. So marvel at the name of this store over here. There's the name of the store over here. That is the name of the store. It says Fußbodenschleifmaschinenverleih. And yes, that is one word. It's a compound word. There are many other words that go in there. What a huge word that is. That is one word. Let me read it again. So here goes. Fußbodenschleifmaschinenverleih is actually very straightforward, transparent compound. You could go buy a rent a floor sander over here. You know, if you got a hardwood floor in your house, every few years you need to sand it down to, you know, keep it nice. And so you need a special machine for that. You could hire somebody. People wouldn't buy that kind of machine. You only need it, what, once in 10 years or something. So you can go to a place like this and rent yourself one. So it's a very specialized kind of store over here. What do all the different pieces mean? How is this a compound? Well, here's the key to the riddle. Here's how it works over here. The first 2 parts are Fuß and Boden. Fuß is actually the word for foot, and Boden means ground. And together, Fußboden is a compound word that means floor. Literally foot ground, the ground that your foot is on. Foot ground is a compound word, and it means the floor below you, right? So Fußboden is a compound word. It means floor. There it is. That's the first compound in there. The next 2 things that go together are Schleif. There is Schleif and Maschine. You probably recognize that. That's the word machine that we have in English as well. Schleif means to polish, and Maschine means machine. So Schleifmaschine means a polishing machine. So literally this says floor polishing machine, and Verleih just means rental. So literally it says floor polishing machine rental, all compounded into one transparent meaning, no spaces, no hyphens, all written together. This is why German gets these nice big words. Right. Another way of making words is also relying on two words we already have, but instead of just putting them together neatly side by side as compounding does, what you do instead is you run the two words at each other at high speed so that they'll collide and get all mangled up, and only pieces of the original words are left. So compounds have the two original words neatly side by side, bookstore. A blend will mash the two words together. This is how we get words like smog, which originally was made using the words smoke and fog, putting these two words together. Now, if we were going to make a compound, it would be smoke fog, or maybe fog smoke, whichever way you like it. But instead of neatly having them side by side as in a compound, you only have pieces left in the word smog. The sm is all you have left from the smoke, and the og is all you have to have left from the fog. In other words, random pieces of the original words, literally random pieces of the original words. And yes, it's true, smog, real smog, doesn't just involve smoke and fog, but that's what the word has. That's what the word says. Here's another very common blend that we all know. Brunch is a blend from breakfast and lunch. So, you know, it's 11 a.m., too late to call it breakfast, maybe too early to call it lunch. So let's use a blend of here, brunch. And notice that all you have left from the breakfast is the burr. It's really random pieces, you know, unrecognizable burr. All the rest of the breakfast is gone. Lunch only lost its L. So here goes brunch, breakfast and lunch. And people do use these creatively. Some years ago, there was a commercial on television where I think it was for like a gas station market or something like that. Some guys in the middle of the afternoon were stopping by a gas station, and one guy went into the store to buy himself some hot dog, and his friends are asking him, you know, wait, what are you eating? I mean, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. What meal is this hot dog? And the guy answered, it's dinner. And of course, that wasn't a word that existed in English. I don't think that still exists in English, but the people who made the commercial, they created it just for their commercial. And his friends were saying, dinner, what's that? Well, it's lunch and dinner, of course, right? And he created his own blend over there. Blends are also known as portmanteau words, if you like to use a fancy French derived words for the same thing. Here's another one, motel, which is a blend from motor hotel, right? Motel, motor hotel gives you motel. There's a picture of a very classy, beautiful motel over there, right-hand side. The Disney people, they call what they're doing Imagineering. You know, running those theme parks and whatever they do involves a lot of imagination and a lot of engineering, the art and the technology, right? And so they created their own blend to describe that. They call it Imagineering. I don't know if they actually have a copyright on that word. Nobody else uses that word. That's a Disney word that they use for themselves. Yeah, there's a lot of words like that. A telethon, it's one of those you know, never-ending shows on TV where they collect money for a good cause, you know, blended from television and marathon. An infomercial, similarly, is an information commercial blended together. A sitcom is a situation comedy. A lot of TV terms over here, right? And here's an old one, a camcorder. Anybody still know what that is? We no longer have camcorders because we got cell phones, we got smartphones doing all of this now, but machine like that, everybody used to have to record their videos from their wedding and their kids and whatever, a camera recorder blend, and that's probably going to disappear from the language as we no longer have those machines, right? So anyways, other languages may do the same thing. They use blending as well. Anybody speak some Japanese? I'm going to show you some Japanese blending. Actually, Japanese blending using English pieces, originally English words that were borrowed into Japanese and then blended together. So here goes. Pokemon is a Japanese word. And of course, you all know what Pokemon is, right? This is how you write it in Japanese. Pokemon actually created in Japan by Japanese people for the Japanese language, but from English pieces. It's from the word pocket and the word monster. So literally pocket monster, or in Japanese, Poketo monster. Poketo monster becomes shortened, blended together as Pokemon, right? And of course, there he is, the most famous one of them all. There's Pikachu, right? See how we're doing with the time over here. Oh, we're doing good. Another way of making new words also relies on words we already have. You see, language is as long as possible will rely on what we already have, right? We can use the words we already have, compound them together to make a new word, or we can take words we already have and blend them together to make a new word. Derivation also relies on words we already have, but then instead of adding a second word, all you add is perhaps a prefix in the beginning or an ending, a suffix on the right. And here's how that goes. Look at all those errors, how words can be made. This is by far the most common way of creating new words in many languages. So take a word like grace, a simple word like grace in English. You could add the suffix full to that to make the word graceful, which is now an adjective, right? So you can talk about a graceful dance, a graceful performance, and so on, right? And from that word graceful, you could add the ending ness to make the word gracefulness. And that now is a noun. You can talk about the gracefulness of the dancers in that particular performance. Where you started off with one word, grace, you now have three. And we actually reuse all of these endings, all of these suffixes and prefixes as well to make many different words. So just like you make graceful from grace, you also make hopeful from hope and helpful from help, and so on, right? And of course, once you have helpful, you can make helpfulness. And once you have hopeful, you have hopefulness. As a learner of the language, you didn't have to memorize all of these separately. What you know is the recipe. You know what all of these endings are, like the ending full and the ending ness and others as well. And you know how to tag those onto the words that you already have. And so very soon, where you started with one words, you end up with dozens. Of course, if there can be a graceful performance, there can also be an ungraceful performance. Notice un means not. It's not a word, but it has the meaning of negative or not, right? The opposite. And un can be attached to all of these words. So just like somebody else may be unhelpful, helpful, unhelpful, right? And from that you get unhelpfulness, just like here you get ungracefulness. And again, you don't memorize these words separately. You know the pattern as a fluent speaker of the language. In fact, there probably are people right here among us who may have never ever used the word ungracefulness before, and yet you understand it immediately because you know the structure of the words, you know all of these pieces. When something doesn't have grace, I can also call it graceless, without grace, right? And of course, from that you can make gracelessness as well. Look how many different words I already have, all relying on these suffixes like full and less and ness, and on prefixes like un. And before long, you can have a very large number of words. When you buy yourself those books that promise to increase your word power, most of what those books teach you about is the use of such prefixes and suffixes. And there are literally hundreds of those. English has over 800 such quite common prefixes and suffixes that go into deriving words from basic words like grace or help and hope. When you take somebody's grace away, you disgrace them. Well, there's another word, grace, that is made from grace, disgrace. And notice here there's a prefix dis over here, which usually means something like away, right? So when you disassemble something, you're taking it apart, the opposite of assembling something, right? When somebody dismounts from a horse, they're going away from the horse, and so on. So, and of course, you can have disgraceful. And of course, you can get disgracefulness. Yeah, it's a very common way of making lots and lots of different words from a rather small number of original words that you started with. Most languages have very rich derivational morphology, lots of affixes, prefixes, and suffixes like we see here in English. Then again, there are some languages who don't have any compounding at all. If you speak Vietnamese or if you speak Cambodian, those are fine languages. They don't have any prefixes and suffixes at all. They just use different ways of making more words. Oh, here's the word gracious. Did you know that gracious is related to grace? That's a little bit more of an indirect connection. Lexicographer, a person who's into word studies, would know that. But from gracious, you could make graciously and graciousness and ungraciously and so on. Again, a whole other avenue of words that you open up over there with lots more prefixes and suffixes yet again. And then, of course, there's the word to grace, which is a verb where you don't add any prefix or suffix. You just change the word class to an action word, to a verb, right? So you can say, her picture graced the cover of this month's magazine or this week's magazine, right? So anyways, gonna skip the part about back formation because that always confuses people. It does have a nice picture of a TV, but I'm gonna skip that and I won't talk about it on our next exam either. Anyways, another way of making new words is called clipping. Clipping is something that English likes to do a lot, especially colloquial English. Colloquial English, spoken English, likes its words short. We don't like long words. So when we see long words like laboratory, we clip it down to size and we make a short word out of it. We say lab, right? We don't want to say laboratory. That's way too long and cumbersome. So we talk about the lab. When you take a science class for your GE, you take the lecture and then along with it, there's a lab that you also need to take, right? Lab, that's what clipping is called. Clipping is literally taking scissors to the word and cutting off a piece, perhaps in the beginning or perhaps in the end, or perhaps both sides. Here are some examples of common clippings in English. English likes to do that a lot. This is not all that common in a lot of other languages, and especially in spoken casual usage, this is super common in English. So lab is clipped from laboratory. There's a nice picture of a lab, or is it a laboratory? I don't know, same thing, right? Gas is short for gasoline, right? Gasoline, we put gasoline in our cars, but that word has too many syllables, so we say gas instead. Let me go to the gas station. Nobody says gasoline station, right? And it's interesting that we clip it down to size, even though the word gas already exists in the language. We already had a word gas, meaning something that is not solid and not liquid, like oxygen is a gas, right? Right here, by clipping gasoline down to gas, we now have a kind of gas which is not a gas, because gasoline is a liquid, right? And it shouldn't need to confuse it, but it just doesn't, because we know in any given situation, whether we're at the station filling the tank of a car or whether you're in chemistry class, we know the difference, right? So it doesn't usually lead to confusion. Anyway, take that long word gasoline, clip it down to size and make the short word gas. We're going to have another exam in this class. Of course, exam clipped from a longer word, examination, right? Memo, short from memorandum when you send somebody a memo, right? Phone is from telephone. This time it's the beginning that we clip off, so it could be either side that goes, right? So phone from telephone, again, clip down to size. And sometimes you take scissors to both ends. Flu is short for influenza. Did you get your flu shots already? You really should. They expect a very bad flu season this year, potentially anyways. The big word is influenza. Influenza, of course, is a medical term. So if if you are in the hospital, then all the nurses and the doctors, they will talk about you having influenza, right? But when you call home, you tell your family that you got a bad case of the flu, right? For us, it's flu, and flu is like a clipping from influenza. Sounds a lot less bad, right? I mean, influenza sounds like a serious disease. Flu is like, I can handle flu, that's not so bad anyways. Fan is short from fanatic, and you can see how the meaning has changed. I mean, you may be an Angel fan, Angels fan without being really fanatic about it, right? Some people are. That guy is, but then again, he's from Cal Poly. Those people are weird. Psych is clipped from psychology, and that's short for psychology, right? Cab. Let me call a cab. You know the long form of cab, and why when the cab arrives. Nowadays you get an Uber, but in a few years ago, when the cab arrives, it's usually a yellow color or something, and the sign on the roof doesn't say cab, it says taxi. Why would that be? What's going on over here? What's the original longer word? It was originally taxi cab, right? Taxi cab. And one part made it to the roof of the car. It says taxi on there. You watch some movies, you can see that. And cab is what we hail, right? Let me hail a cab. That becomes the clipped version, the everyday version. Interestingly, in this case, the original word taxi cab was originally clipped down from a much longer word, a word that nobody remembers anymore. The original word was taximeter cabriolet, which gives you taxi cab, taxiometer cabriolet. Way too long. English doesn't like long words like that, except, in like technical memos or technical books or something like that. We don't like long words like that. Let me see how much time we got. How long you want to do this? It's 5:38. How about we go to like 5:45, and that gives you some time to watch the video as well. So let me do another 5 minutes over here with your permission. Another way of making new words relies on initials, acronyms. Initials for making a new word. So, when there's a bad crime to be solved, you call the FBI. Everybody knows those folks are the FBI. Maybe not everybody knows what the letters F and B and I all stand for. You don't have to know what the letters stand for. FBI, those are the crime-fighting guys. If there's like a kidnapping, a murder or something, the bank robbery, they'll solve the case, right? Those are called initialisms, also known as acronyms. And depending on whether you read them as a sequence of letters or as if they were whole words, you call them letter acronyms or word acronyms. So FBI is a letter acronym. You read the letters as a sequence of letters, FBI, and it means Federal Bureau of Investigations, right? Each letter stands for something. But again, a person using the word FBI may or may not know what the original letters originally stood for. You don't have to know what the letters originally stood for. You just know FBI as the word, and that's all you need to know. In fact, sometimes very few people still remember what the original letters stood for. So for example, let's test you guys, and you can see if you know the answer to this. When you need some cash, you can go into a bank branch, of course, or you can use a machine that'll give you cash. That kind of machine is called an ATM, or ATM machine, some people call it. You know the word ATM. Oh, I need to go to the ATM to get some cash, right? Do you know what the letter A and T and M, what all those letters stand for? And Eric is saying automatic tender machine, and that is a good guess. Close, but not quite accurate. But you do know what an ATM is, and that exactly is the point. You don't need to precisely know what all the letters stand for. Something, something or other machine, that's probably right. Absolutely, that's right. You know, we don't need to know exactly what all the letters stand for. Obviously, the M means machine. We do know that, right? The M means machine, right? ATM, anyone I want to go do another guess before we get the answer? It means automated, not automatic, automated teller machine. You know, a teller is the person who works in the bank branch, the kind of person you go to at the counter who will give you the cash. That's a teller. Well, the machine outside is just like a teller, like that person, except it's a machine. So it's an automated version of what a teller would normally be, right? And so automated teller machine, ATM. That's how the word came about. But like we just discover here, most people don't even remember that anymore. ATM, that's what we call it. Unless you're in England. In England, they don't use the word ATM. Anybody know how to get cash in England? What's the British English word for ATM? In England, you go to a cash point. You go to a cash point, totally different word. So anyways, here's some common letter acronyms. ATM, automated teller machine. When you get that sandwich, the BLT, right? You go to the sandwich store, you order a BLT, everybody knows what you're gonna get. And the letters, of course, reference 3 important ingredients of that particular sandwich, namely bacon, lettuce, and tomato, right? But notice when you order a BLT, you don't want just bacon and lettuce and tomatoes. You want a sandwich made from those ingredients, and then perhaps mayonnaise or, you know, with some sauce or whatever, you know. So when you look at some others, when you order things online, sometimes they give you the option to pay for the package as you're getting it on the door. You order the package COD. I don't think Amazon does that, but some sites do that. And so when you're ordering COD, that's cash on delivery. They bring the package to your door. You give them the cash, or else they take the package away again, right? CD, anybody remember what those are? CDs, sort of like, I need to update my slides. Way back long ago, before we had streaming music, people used to have these shiny discs. Remember those, you know, little shiny discs that played music on special machine. We don't have those anymore. It's compact disc. Compact is CDs. Right? Oh, CSUF, that's a beautiful letter acronym over here. California State University, Fullerton. By the way, CSUF is also a nice way to illustrate that the same acronym may mean different things to different people. Like one time, some years ago, I was on vacation in Colorado. I went to Rocky Mountain National Park in northern Colorado, and it seems like everybody in the area was walking around with CSUF t-shirts. I felt right at home. It was wonderful. You know, I thought, wow, Fullerton is real popular over here, until I realized that for them, CSUF means Colorado State University at Fort Collins. Same acronym, different meaning. Like USC, most people think it means University of Southern California. But if you're from UCLA, then you know it means University for Spoiled Children, right? Same acronym, different interpretation. Every letter stands for something. That's what acronyms are all about. These don't all have to be nice words, like SOB. That's an acronym. Oh, Bob's a real SOB. And like in all the other cases, each letter stands for something. Do you know what all the letters stand for in SOB? SOB stands for son of a gun, son of a gun. SOB spells it right out, son of a gun, right? SOB. TLC, tender loving care, and so on. These are letter acronyms. You read them as sequences of letters. When an initialism is read as if it was a real word, instead of spelling out the letters, we call them word acronyms. Like the people who shoot rockets into space, who supply the space station, they are NASA, not NASA, they are NASA, right? You read it as if it was a word. And yes, each letter means something. This word was created way back in the 1950s. So that's an old acronym. I don't think anybody remembers what the letters originally stood for. National Aeronautics and Space Administration, right? You don't have to know that, but you know NASA, those are the rocket people, right? MAD is an organization against drunk drivers. Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, MAD, that spells out their name. And they actually picked the acronym to read out how they feel, right? They really are mad about those drunk drivers, right? And sometimes people do that, you know, making the acronym read out a certain way. AIDS, the name of the disease, right? Acquired immune deficiency syndrome. Did you even know that laser was an acronym? Laser. It just looks like a regular word, right? Those light beams, right? Colorful light beams, laser. Physicists made that. Light, it means light amplification through stimulated emission of radiation, an acronym, many other ones. Of course, we have tons of acronyms over here. Again, this is important to realize. As a speaker, it's not necessary that you know what all the letters really stand for. You learn the acronym as a word, just like you remember and learn any other word. You know that machine where I go get the cash, that's the ATM. And I don't know, I don't have to know what the letters originally stood for. Also, as we mentioned, the same initialism can have different meanings to different people. CSUF for us means Cal State Fullerton. In Colorado, it means something else. So sometimes people play with that. If you're talking about the CIA, you're talking spies, right? James Bond. It's the Central Intelligence Agency. But then again, in Northern California, there's a cooking school they call the CIA. They call themselves the Culinary Institute of America. And of course, it's not an accident. They wanted to have that CIA acronym. They just were, you know, making fun with the words. Initialisms are quite widespread across languages. And you can use an initialism to spell out a message, like those Mothers Against Drunk Driving people did. They really are mad about the drunk drivers. Look at this organization here. This is a screenshot of the website for an organization called BRAIN, and they use the word BRAIN as an acronym for Brain Rehabilitation and Injury Network, BRAIN. And of course, yeah, they put it together so it reads out the word brain because they're interested in brains. Obviously, it spells out what they're dealing with, what they're concerned with. So anyways, looking at one more slide, initialisms in French. Again, other languages use acronyms, initialisms as well, both word acronyms and letter acronyms. So here's some French example. The French are really proud of some of their high technology, like their high-speed trains, some of the finest high-speed trains in the world. The French high-speed train is called in French the TGV, and that's an acronym, TGV. Literally the letters TGV. TGV means train à grande vitesse. It means high-speed train in the French language. And just like everybody else, they can make fun of it. This is not a high-speed train. The French say that's the train à grande vibration, the high vibration train. Anyways, that's all we have time for today. We'll pick it up next time with slide number 20. I'll see you guys a week from today, and then we'll move on into the structure of words. Thank you for being here. Do watch that video, The Empire Strikes Back. It's on YouTube. I'll see you guys a week from today, and we'll have all of our results from the midterm as well. Thank you very much. Any questions, comments before we go away? All right. Good to see you all. See you next week. Bye-bye. Au revoir.